Is Gautam Adani going to be arrested? Can he be extradited? What will happen when Donald Trump takes charge in January? Will things change for him? There are many questions circulating in social media and in public discourse since the US indictment of Gautam Adani, the chairman of the Adani Group. To answer these questions, I have with me here Manish Tewari, somebody you're very familiar with. Manish, welcome to the print.
Thank you, DK. It's always a pleasure having a conversation with you, my friend.
Thank you. To start with, can I request you to keep your Congress MP's hat aside and wear the other hats that you wear? You're an eminent lawyer, you are a very respected voice on geostrategy. So, if you wear those two hats, how do you see this entire case panning out? What's next for Gautam Adani?
In any case, I wear the first hat very occasionally. So, therefore, it is perfectly all right. DK, to answer your question straight off the bat, it is very concerning and it is very disconcerting. It's concerning for the simple reason that it is not about a particular Indian conglomerate. It is about the larger message that we are sending to the global community in terms of what kind of a business environment that we have. Number two, it is also about the efficacy and the integrity of our own regulatory process. It is strange, if not quixotic, that the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States of America decided to pursue a concurrent indictment. While in India, going back to the Hindenburg revelations, you have the Securities and Exchange Board of India almost bending over backwards to give the Adani conglomerate a clean chit or a clean slate. So therefore, the issues are actually beyond just the indictment of one conglomerate in a particular geography. Given the fact that they operate in multiple geographies across the world, and today you've seen Kenya has pulled the plug on the airport deal. In Australia, there are very, very serious concerns going back almost a decade when the Adani Group had acquired the Carmichael coal mines and the entire process of trying to put a pipeline through the Great Barrier Reef, which was very, very strongly opposed. Also, with regard to Bangladesh, where the power purchase agreement has now been in a quandary for a while, and Government of India in August decided to amend the rules in order to allow the Adani power plant in Jharkhand, in Goda, if I'm not mistaken, to actually plug into the Indian grid. So, therefore, there are multiple issues which have been lingering for a long time. And this indictment has unfortunately served to crystallize those issues for the Adani Group. That is number one. And number two, the larger question, what kind of a signal are we sending about India's business environment?
We are not going to delve much into the impact, well, possible impact on Adani's business empire. What we are curious about is what's going to happen now. The US court has issued arrest warrant against him.
Well, as far as I understand, and the little that I've been able to read up, there are two parallel indictments. There is an indictment by the Eastern District Court of New York, which has been filed by the attorney for the Eastern District. And then there is an indictment which has been parallelly filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States of America. So obviously, both these judicial processes will play themselves out concurrently. Now, it is really up to those people who have been indicted as to how are they best advised by their lawyers. Are they advised by their lawyers to go and face the process of justice in the United States? or are they advised by their lawyers to contest it in absentia from outside? That is really a call which their legal team will have to take in conjunction with the people who have been indicted. But suffice to say that there are judicial processes and legal processes in the United States of America which have been set in motion.
If you were his lawyer, what would be your advice?
Well, the first thing, DK, you learn as a lawyer is never to give unsolicited advice, and number two, not to give advice which is not paid for, because both those pieces of advice would never be taken seriously. But on a separate note, I think they will have to figure out their legal strategy, because the United States of America has treaty relationships with many countries across the continent. So, therefore, this may not be a warrant which is localized to an American geography. It is quite possible that the warrant could also be executed with those or in those countries with whom the United States of America has those legal relationships, because there are mutual criminal assistance agreements which every country has in place with other countries. So, therefore, you will have to really wait and see as to what really is the remit of that arrest warrant which has been issued against the people who've been indicted. Is it limited by jurisdiction to the United States of America? Or could it possibly be enforced outside the United States of America? That is, if you are traveling in a third country, could that be enforced against you?
If we go by all these talks about possible extradition, now for that to be executed, you need to have similar charges in India too. Adani is not facing any such charge here.
Well, extradition is a different kettle of fish altogether. And there is a whole legal process which has to be gone through. And for that, the US courts will obviously have to issue a letters rogatory. That would be a formal request from a US court to an Indian court before those processes can be set in motion. And those processes, do take their own time to play themselves out. And obviously, it goes through the same hierarchy of courts as any criminal appeal process would. So therefore, that's something which acquires a life of its own. But the question is that would those people who have been indicted really want to take it to that plane? I mean, that's a call which they would have to take.
Your leader Rahul Gandhi has been saying that that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will not take any action against Adani here because they are friends. Now, this has been his allegation for a long time. But what do you expect the Indian authorities to do here?
Well, first of all, since the allegations concern alleged bribery in India, I think legal and judicial processes in India, especially the law enforcement authorities, can independently take note of those allegations. And there are parallel processes which can proceed, because obviously there is there are no names in the indictment as yet. But were the government of India to be serious about really going to the bottom of this indictment, they could request the United States of America to share whatever information they have available with them, with the government of India, which then can analyze that information, sift through it, and energize its own legal processes or investigative processes. That is the prudent course which any nation, when confronted with allegations of this nature, would necessarily and logically undertake.
Do you see it happening here?
Well, now you're asking me to switch to a hat which you asked me not to wear. So, therefore, I am not going to be switching to that hat. Suffice to say that if you look at the trajectory over the past 10 years, obviously, those allegations which have been made, not only by the leadership of the Indian National Congress, but even concerned civil society activists outside the framework of the formal political system, do not necessarily suggest that that would be a course which would be followed.
When Biden steps down and Trump takes over in January, do you see any possible change in the US government's approach to this entire case?
Well, the little that I understand the judicial processes and legal processes in the US, the Chinese wall is almost like a concrete wall. And so, therefore, the separation of powers is almost absolute. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had a situation whereby a sitting president's son would have been indicted on multiple different counts by the US judicial system. You have a former president of the United States of America, who is now president elect of the United States of America, who also stands indicted in New York by courts of law for alleged offenses, which the prosecutors believe that he may have committed or he has committed. In any case, the executive branch in the United States of America is really forbidden by law to interact with the Department of Justice. In fact, even on very critical national security issues, if you read Bob Woodward's book, War, the latest book which has
Yes.
come out,
Okay,
right?
I'm reading
Yeah,
that Rage.
yeah.
What an
So,
interesting book.
so the latest book which has come out, War, which deals with the Biden presidency, you would see as to how difficult it is for executive branch officials to try and even get a point of view across to the Department of Justice, which acts in a fairly insular and a completely autonomous manner. And that's why the kind of pushback that you saw with regard to the proposed first nominee of President elect Trump as the Attorney General of the US really evidences that. So I do not think the political interference, which can or may happen in certain other geographies, is really a possibility or is really within the realm of possibility, given how the US system is structured and also how the prosecutors and the judiciary very zealously guard their independence.
But as we are given to understand that Trump is a very different commodity altogether. He can steamroll anything, anywhere, in a very non-conventional way. Things he can do, probably others have not been doing it, but probably he can pull off anything. And that's what we are told. We are talking about the most powerful person on earth today.
Well, at the end of any judicial process, he obviously has the powers to grant a pardon. And so, therefore, the first thing which I think will be watched very carefully is when President elect Trump becomes President of the United States of America on the 20th of January 2025. Would he be pardoning his own self?
Generally, in India, all these processes take a long, long time. Could you tell us about the US system? How long will all these things take a kind of finality? Uh,
Well, things move pretty fast out there because dockets are not usually very crowded, and they have fast track systems in place. They also have plea bargains in place in a large number of cases, especially pertaining to financial crimes. If you were to roll back to the great economic meltdown of 2008, a number of people and companies actually entered into plea bargains, paid very hefty fines, and were able to get on with their lives. So, therefore, the US judicial system is very differently structured from our judicial system. And therefore, under those circumstances, there is a lot of play within the joints, which gives a lot of leverage to both the prosecution as well as the defendants, and of course, the presiding judge, to take a view which may actually cut short a judicial proceeding. Well, as I understand that there are two separate statutes which are being applied. One is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
Mhm.
And yesterday I was informed by an anchor friend during a similar discussion that they've possibly applied the Foreign Extortion Practices Act also. Now, this is in addition to whatever proceedings the Securities and Exchange Commission will undertake. And so, as I was earlier stating, and which is what you are really reaffirming, is that within the U.S. system as it stands constituted, and especially when you look at financial arena or alleged financial crimes, there are a lot of ways in which a modus vivendi, short of a prison term, can legitimately be obtained. But ultimately, that is also going to completely and absolutely uh, harm your reputation as a business, as a conglomerate. It harms the reputation of a country and the kind of business environment that it has, because essentially a plea bargain means that you're accepting guilt, and then you are really bargaining in terms of uh, how much the fine or the sentence should be. But implicit in the plea bargain is an admission of guilt. Now, whether the defendants would be comfortable with that, I am not very sure. That's really between them and their legal teams.
Let me speak to you now as a politician and Congress MP. Your party is demanding JPC. Do you think it's going to yield anything for you? I mean, JPCs, we have seen so many JPCs. I mean, usually the ruling parties have their way. Why do you want a JPC?
DK, the question is who will regulate the regulator? So there are two distinct issues involved there. The first issue is with regard to the alleged misdemeanors of the Adani conglomerate. That also is something which requires rigorous scrutiny, which somehow is being evaded and averted, uh, going all the way back to the Hindenburg expose. The second question is that if the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States of America was able to pick it up, what prevented the Securities and Exchange Board of India from really going down the same route? However, what you have seen is that the Securities and Exchange Board of India has almost been bending backwards in order to ostensibly give the Adani conglomerate a clean sheet. So, under those circumstances, it is not only about one conglomerate, as I stated earlier, but about the integrity of our regulatory processes also. And except for Parliament, and Parliament through a parliamentary committee, either the Parliamentary Standing Committee of Finance, which exercises oversight and superintendence over the regulators, the Reserve Bank of India, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, the insurance regulator, the pension funds regulator, the gift city regulator, and I think one or two more. Either that does the job, or a joint parliamentary committee or a joint committee of parliament that does the job.
So looking at it practically and looking at how other parliamentary standing committees have been functioning of late, you will end up just giving your dissent notes. I mean, that's about it. The majority of the members, the chairman too, would be from the ruling party. So if you're accusing the ruling party of trying to cover up the things, is JPC an answer?
Well, TK, you are partly correct. Unfortunately, we are in an extremely polarized environment. where everything is contested, including the truth and the various versions of truth, because you have alternative realities at play now. But let me take you back to the 1992-1993 JPC, into Harshad Mehta and the stock market scam which had taken place. That is what actually set the ball rolling for a Securities and Exchange Board of India legislation to come in place and for the board to come in existence. Similarly, when the Ketan Parekh episode took place, again it was on the recommendations of the Joint Parliamentary Committee that the entire judicial processes or the entire regulatory processes were actually strengthened. So it is not as if joint parliamentary committees, have been completely or abysmal failures or totally divided on political lines. For example, when the Joint Committee of Parliament looked at the multi-state cooperative amendment bill, there was a fair amount of constructive inputs which were incorporated by the government. So, question is that if it is not going to be a joint parliamentary committee, then who is going to do the job? Who is going to exercise superintendence? It obviously cannot be the regulators themselves, because there's a big question mark on SEBI as we currently speak. It obviously has gone through the judicial processes. The entire Hindenburg report was adjudicated upon. And the judiciary actually looks at it from a very, very narrow remit, with regard to alleged criminality, etc., etc. But in terms of strengthening infrastructure, in terms of strengthening regulatory oversight, that is the function and the domain of Parliament. And of course, there is this question of this particular conglomerate, which is operating in multiple geographies, and what kind of a message is it sending to people across the world with regard to our business environment?
If the government does not agree to a JPC, what are your options as the principal opposition party?
Well, the first and foremost thing would be to try and convince government with regard to the need for a joint parliamentary committee. As you are aware that between the February of 2024, when the previous parliament adjourned after its last session, and the June of 2024, when the current Lok Sabha met for its first session, there has been a change in the complexion of the Lok Sabha. The India bloc today accounts for over 230 MPs, as opposed to about 322 odd of the NDA bloc. So there has been a fundamental change in the complexion of parliament. And so, would the government really choose to ignore a demand if it is articulated by a substantial bulk of the members in both houses of parliament? Is a call which the government would have to very seriously consider and take.
Are you looking to engage with with the other parties, the non-BJP parties in the NDA, say the TDP, for instance, to force the
Well,
government
that
to?
Well, that's a call which the parliamentary party leadership will have to take. I think it's early days as yet, because it has just been 24 hours since these revelations have come out in the public space, and so therefore everybody would obviously take some time to absorb it, to digest it, and there would be then a strategy put in place. And the reason why I say that is because ultimately everybody would be interested in seeing that an improper message with regard to India as a business destination does not go out. And if you choose not to take any action, then I leave it to your judgment as to what investors around the world would really conclude.
There are many things that the BJP has said to counter your allegations. I'll just cite two. First is, of course, it's just an indictment. It's not conviction. So what's so much fuss about? And second is when you talk about the states from where the power supply, solar power supply contract was secured. One was Chhattisgarh, when Bhupesh Baghel, your party chief minister, was in place.
Well, as I said, it is not about individuals. And insofar as an indictment is concerned, yes, an indictment is not a conviction. I don't think it requires any rocket science to decipher that. But an indictment is also indicative of the fact that the prosecutors felt that they prima facie have enough evidence at their command to be able to present it before a court of law for a proper adjudication. And unlike in India, where the law of torts is not very well developed, in US, the kind of which you may have to bear uh, because of uh, uh, because of, let's say, tardy prosecution or because of misapplication of the law is enormous. You know, the costs which get awarded for miscarriage of justice or ostensible miscarriage of justice are exponential, going by any standards.
Manish, just last question, looking at your stand on this entire affair and what the BJP has been saying, winter session of parliament is going to start from the 25th. Are we looking at another session being washed out?
Well, it would really depend upon the government. If the government were to agree to the demands of the opposition, which, in the light of the recent disclosures, seem to be legitimate, kosher demands, then there is no reason why the parliament session should get wiped out. But if the government decides to dig in, then of course it's another matter.
All right, Manish, thank you very much for sparing time for us. Thanks a lot.
The pleasure is all mine, my friend. Thank you very much.